Hi and welcome to my 5th video on my series on chord tone soloing. This week we will be talking about arpeggios. Before we proceed, let's do a quick recap. In the previous video, we introduced the concept of scalar interchange for chord tone soloing. Please check it out if you haven't. If the scale doesn't change underneath, then it's quite easy. But if it does, in music that changes key, then you would know how to change accordingly. Arpeggios, by definition, are notes of a chord played sequentially. However, its role in chord tone soloing is actually lost on a lot of players. So let's look at it again. Arpeggios are notes of a chord. In essence, they are chord tones played sequentially. So does that mean that if you are playing arpeggios, we are doing chord tone soloing? Not exactly. It all depends on the underlying chord. So let's say you're soloing in the key of E minor and you're ripping up all the arpeggios in the key of E minor and G major. But then the chord changes to D major. So if you are playing the arpeggio for D major, then in essence you could say that is partly chord tone soloing. But if you're not playing the D major arpeggio, then you're not. So the real question is, how do we apply arpeggios not as arpeggios but rather as chord tones? So there are two approaches to using arpeggios in chord tone soloing. The first involves seeing the arpeggio as being derived from the underlying major scale box. We've already covered scalar interchange in the previous levels, and we've also covered shape targeting in level 2. So now we can actually connect these two together. Shape targeting, however, primarily deals with triads, but we can still use the concept over here. Let's quickly recap. So say for instance you have D, okay, in the key of D, this is the 1, so the 4 would be G, would be this shape, and then the 5 would be, okay, that would be A, or, right, again, if you're playing a chord, it would look like that. But as a shape for arpeggios, right, you look at it as, right, if you haven't seen my video on shape targeting, please do check it out. How would we connect these shapes? So for instance, okay, the 1 chord triad, the 4 chord triad, and the 5 chord triad. Okay, if we were in the key of D, then the underlying scale would be, right, so we have a C sharp there. So it sounds something like this. So you can actually hear when it's 1, when it's 4, and when it's the 5 chord. If we are playing blues, however, because in blues, all of the chords are 7th chords. So essentially the 1 chord, D7, which is, okay, 4 chord, and then back to the 1. Okay, now I'm just going to jump to the 5 chord, 4 chord, and back to the 1 chord in this position. So what are the arpeggios over here? So we have the D7 arpeggio, okay. Now we also need to know that an arpeggio need not always start on the root, right? There are other places that you can start the arpeggio from. It's like your modes. Let's say you start it on, say, the 3rd degree instead, on the 5th. Right, you can even go lower, start from there, or start from here. The important part here is that you're still playing the D7 arpeggio in the 5th position, right, over this scale box, for instance. Okay, so what about the 4 chord G7? What would be the shape? Okay, the arpeggio would be, and you can add this high note as well if you like as an extension. Okay, and what about the 5 chord? It would be this shape. Again, you can extend it here, or you can play it this way. Okay, so if you were to connect it all together, then we can get a flowing arpeggio sequence that will reveal your chord tone. So, example. You can even hear the changes happening, right? We're playing blues, it sounds like a blues progression, and we're not even playing the chords. And the reason for that is because your chord tones are already inside the arpeggios. Now, how can we learn this approach? Okay, the first thing that we did just now, we were playing the arpeggios up and down. Okay, I think there is no hard and fast rule with regards to which direction you should learn. But if you started off with your, I guess, descending or ascending, right, try to learn the reverse as well, right, from the top. For instance, right, the trick is when you want to change in the middle. Okay, that's the tricky part. Okay, so you can also come up with your own sequences where you begin from the middle, right, and end in the middle and change in the middle. So it is all up to you. But the important part here is what is the underlying scale tones should you need it, right? Because we're in this position, so let's recap. The underlying scale tones would begin with the Dorian. Over the 4 chord, we play the Aeolian. Right? And then over the 5 chord, it's the Mixolydian shape. Okay, so for instance, we use that as the underlying, I guess, scale. Right? Let's go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you know essentially where the changes are based on the scalar interchange. Now let us try to combine that with some arpeggios. If you want to use arpeggios for jazz, okay, let's use the same example that we did last week, which was the circle of fifths progression, because it contained the major 251 and the minor 251. Just a recap, you can use the same scale shape for 6 out of the 7 bars, right? So since last week we did it at the 5th position, right? So 251 over here, okay. B minor 7 flat 5, the same, we'll use it the same voicing, we'll use a voicing within the same box. Then it's just the E7 flat 9, where we're going to change to harmonic minor. Right, and then over the A minor we go back to the same, I guess the A minor shape, and then A7, that's when we change to the A mixolydian. Okay, so most of the scales underneath will stay the same. But again, the arpeggios, okay, right, let me just demonstrate. Say for instance, okay, so sorry, so do you get the idea here, right? You can even hear the chord changes. Again, learn to interconnect between them if you must. Great. The idea of using arpeggios is not just to go up and down wholesale. You can if you want to, right? But it's better to use, I suppose, fragments out of it. Then again, connect it with the underlying scale tones. How do we get good at this? Okay, first and foremost, right, you have to figure out the arpeggios in the sequence, right? I always suggest learning arpeggios in the context of what you are using, right? So, okay, example, instead of like just learning the D7, right, you learn them in order of, say, the blues progression, right? So it makes more fun when you're practicing anyway. Okay, so similarly, right, for your jazz arpeggios, learn them in the order. Right. Also learn them in reverse. Right, so again, the idea here is you want to learn how the arpeggios change in sequence, right? And as you get better, you don't just want to be changing at the top. You want to change somewhere in the middle as well, right? So you're always free to improvise your ideas. Alright guys, that's it for this video. It'll be too much for me to cover all 5 positions in one single sitting, so I will break them up and cover them in subsequent videos. Just bear in mind, you can start learning this by yourselves, or you can follow me and we'll cover them together. There are 5 areas on the fretboard in 1 octave, right, or 5 scale boxes, so to speak, and each one of them have your arpeggio sequence in order to play your blues. And this is actually quite significant because in this level we are focusing on 7th chords and no longer just triads. This is actually going to be very useful to connect all of the other concepts that we've covered and we are going to cover in the upcoming Hafni pentatonic system. So just a quick recap before we dive into that. What we've learned so far: note targeting, shape targeting, guide tone targeting, these are concepts, okay? The next level was scalar interchange, which when combined with your arpeggios concepts in this lesson, they serve as the connecting, I suppose, scale or notes, which you can use with your note targeting, shape targeting, and guide tone targeting. Okay, we have one more coming up, which is the pentatonic interchange. In that lesson, I'll be talking about the second way you can actually see arpeggios in form of pentatonics. Okay, if you like this video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. I'm also on Patreon, so please support me there if you want to study in a little bit more detail. I will see you in the next lesson. Take care and good night.